"You need a home, and I need a wife," said the giant rancher to the outcast widow. The sun had barely risen over the small town of Willow Creek, painting the dusty streets with a faint orange glow, when Sarah stepped out of her tiny cabin. The cabin was little more than a weathered wooden box, its paint peeling and roof sagging from years of neglect. Inside, the air was cold, and the floorboards creaked with every step. It was not much, but it had been hers. Her husband had built it with his own hands, and for a brief while it had been a home filled with laughter and hope. Now, the silence that filled the cabin was heavy, pressing down on her like a weight she could not shake. Sarah brushed a stray lock of hair from her face and looked out over the barren patch of land in front of her. She had tried to make the small garden grow, planting what little seeds she had managed to save after her husband passed, but the soil was stubborn, and the weeds often won. Every morning she dug her hands into the dirt, trying to coax life from it, and every evening she returned exhausted, her fingers blistered and her back aching. But she kept going. Survival had become a rhythm, almost like breathing, and she refused to give up, no matter how hard life pressed against her. The town was slowly waking up. From the main street, she could hear the clatter of horse hooves, the creak of wagon wheels, and the low murmur of neighbors greeting one another. She had once been part of this small community, known as a friendly and hardworking young woman. But after her husband's death, whispers had begun to follow her. Some people said he had been careless, others claimed there was something strange about the way he had died. Sarah had never sought to correct these rumors. There was no point. The town had judged her quickly, and she had learned to live quietly, keeping to herself. Even as she tended her modest garden that morning, she felt the weight of isolation. There were days when she would go without speaking to anyone for hours, wandering through the nearby woods to collect firewood or fetch water from the stream. The forest offered a small escape, a place where she could breathe without being watched, without judgment. Yet even in the solitude of the trees, her thoughts often returned to the cabin and the harsh reality she faced. The bills were piling up, and there was a notice pinned to her door last week, warning that if she did not pay her taxes, she would lose her home. That thought alone was enough to bring tears to her eyes. Losing this cabin would mean more than just losing shelter. It would mean the end of the life she had fought so hard to preserve after her husband's death. She clenched her fists and took a deep breath, reminding herself that she had survived worse. She had to find a way to keep this small piece of the world she called home, no matter the cost. The sound of a wagon approaching broke her reverie. Sarah looked up to see Mr. Hargrove, the town's banker, slowly driving down the dirt road. He was a stern man, always precise, and his presence usually meant business that did not bode well for anyone on the edge of financial trouble. He stopped at the edge of her property, tipping his hat but not smiling. "Morning, Sarah," he said, his voice polite but distant. "I hope you've had time to consider the notice about your property." Sarah swallowed hard, forcing herself to nod. "Yes, Mr. Hargrove, I've been thinking about it." He frowned slightly, a hint of impatience in his eyes. "You know the town can't hold the property indefinitely without payment. You must either settle the taxes or make other arrangements." "Other arrangements?" she asked quietly, her heart sinking. She knew what he meant. If she couldn't pay, she would have nowhere to live, and the thought of leaving the cabin her husband had built was unbearable. "Unfortunately, yes," he said, tipping his hat again. "I hope you can find a solution soon." With that, he drove away, leaving Sarah standing alone in the middle of her yard. The silence returned, heavier than before, pressing on her chest. She went back inside the cabin, shutting the door softly behind her. The inside smelled of dust and old wood, mixed with the faint aroma of herbs she kept on the windowsill. Her eyes fell on a small wooden frame, holding a photograph of her late husband, smiling, full of life, full of hope. She ran her fingers over the frame, feeling a lump in her throat. "I won't leave," she whispered to the empty room. I won't give up." That afternoon, Sarah ventured into town. She needed work, money, and perhaps a miracle, though she did not call it that. The streets were crowded with people going about their daily lives, merchants arranging goods, children running between their parents, neighbors sharing gossip. She passed by the general store, the blacksmith, and the small church at the corner. Everyone seemed absorbed in their own world, hardly noticing her as she moved quietly along the street. She stopped at the edge of the town square and watched the people for a moment. Loneliness was a constant companion, but there was also a strange comfort in knowing that she had survived this long, that she had endured loss and hardship without breaking entirely. She found work wherever she could, helping with laundry, tending gardens, or cleaning homes, but the pay was always meager. At the end of each day, she returned to her cabin exhausted, yet proud that she had done what she could to keep going. Despite her struggles, Sarah remained resilient. She found small joys wherever she could. A fresh loaf of bread from the baker, the song of a bird in the morning, or the first green shoots in her stubborn garden, all reminded her that life, though harsh, still held beauty. She clung to these moments, holding them close as if they were precious treasures. Yet the reality of losing her home loomed larger each day. She often stayed up late into the night, thinking of ways to earn enough money, imagining different futures, all while the wind howled outside her cabin and the shadows of the trees stretched across the floor. She had no family left, no friends who could help, and the townspeople who once smiled at her now whispered behind her back. But she did not let despair take hold. She had lived through grief before and had survived, and she would survive this as well. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah lit a small lantern and sat by the window, staring at the darkening sky. The stars began to appear, tiny pinpricks of light in the vast blackness. She allowed herself a small smile, imagining that each one was a reminder that hope still existed, even in the loneliest places. And in that moment, she made a silent promise to herself. No matter what happened, no one would take away her dignity, her courage, or her will to survive. She would find a way through this storm, even if it meant walking alone. That evening, as she prepared a simple meal of bread and stew, she heard a distant sound of hooves approaching. It was faint, but different from the usual noises of the town. Curious, she stepped outside and squinted into the growing darkness. A figure appeared on the horizon, riding a large horse. The rider was tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that made her pause. There was something commanding about him, a sense of authority and strength, yet his approach seemed deliberate, not threatening. Sarah watched as he stopped at the edge of her property and dismounted. The man's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment she felt a flicker of something she had not felt in a long time: interest, curiosity, perhaps even hope. Little did she know that this encounter would mark the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one that could change everything she had struggled to protect. The next morning, Sarah awoke to the sound of birds singing outside her cabin, but her mind was not on the usual chores or the struggles that awaited her. Instead, she could not stop thinking about the stranger she had seen the night before. He had ridden a large horse, towering and powerful, yet there was something calm in his movements, something deliberate and measured. She wondered who he was and why he had come to her remote cabin. Was he a traveler, a messenger, or someone who had heard the whispers about her hardships? As she stepped outside, the sun casting a warm glow over the barren land, she noticed a shadow moving near the edge of her property. The stranger had returned. He approached slowly, and as he came closer, she could see the details of his rugged face, framed by a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes were sharp, but there was a softness in them that spoke of kindness, a rare thing in a world that had been unkind to her for too long. "Good morning," he said in a deep voice, calm yet strong. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Sarah's first instinct was to retreat, to close the door and pretend she was not there. but something in his demeanor made her pause. He did not seem threatening, nor did he carry the arrogance of someone used to wealth and power. He seemed genuine. She nodded cautiously. "I'm James," he said, tipping his hat. "I've heard about your situation. Your cabin is in danger, is it not?" Sarah's heart tightened. She had expected the usual condescension, perhaps even judgment, but this man simply stated what she already knew. He did not pity her, but he did not mock her either. There was honesty in his voice that made her wary yet curious. "Yes," she said quietly, keeping her voice steady despite the anxiety in her chest. "I received a notice about the taxes. I don't know how I will manage." James nodded slowly, as if he understood more than words could convey. "I have a ranch nearby. It's large and it needs care. I could offer you work or even a place to stay if you are willing." Sarah blinked, unsure what to make of the offer. On one hand, it sounded like a lifeline, a chance to save herself from losing everything. On the other, it was intimidating. The idea of working for a man she barely knew, leaving the cabin her husband had built, and entering the scrutiny of a wealthier life was daunting. Pride and fear warred inside her. I don't know," she admitted. "It's not that I don't appreciate the offer, but I've always managed on my own. I'm used to it." James did not press her, though his gaze remained steady. "I respect that," he said. "I am not here to force you, but know this, the ranch is a safe place. You will have work, food, and shelter, and if you ever choose to accept, you will not be judged for your past. Only your efforts and your heart will matter." His words were simple, but they carried weight. For the first time in months, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. The idea that someone could see her for who she was, rather than what others said about her, was almost unbelievable. Over the next few days, James visited her cabin several times, always careful not to overwhelm her. He spoke of the ranch, describing the land, the animals, and the work that needed to be done. Sarah listened, fascinated despite herself. She had spent her life surviving small hardships, but the thought of a larger purpose, a chance to contribute to something meaningful, was both exciting and terrifying. One afternoon, he arrived with a small wagon carrying supplies for her cabin, fresh food, blankets, and tools. "Think of it as a gesture," he said, unloading the items. "You don't have to accept anything more than that. Consider it a way to make your life easier while you decide what to do next." Sarah felt a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. She was not used to receiving kindness without strings attached. She hesitated before speaking, unsure if she should trust him. "Thank you," she said softly. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," James replied. "Just know that you are not alone. There are people willing to help, even when life seems unbearable." Days turned into weeks, and Sarah continued her routine of tending the garden, collecting water, and working odd jobs for neighbors. Yet the presence of James lingered in her thoughts. She began to feel a strange sense of connection with him, though she would never admit it aloud. He had a way of making the harsh reality of her life seem less heavy, simply by being there, offering assistance without judgment, and speaking with honesty and respect. One evening, as the sun set in shades of orange and pink, James rode his horse up to her cabin. "I thought you might like a walk," he said, dismounting. "There's a trail near the creek not far from here. It's peaceful. Sometimes it helps to leave the worries behind for a while." Sarah hesitated, looking at the small garden she had spent the day tending. The thought of leaving her cabin, even briefly, was strange. But the idea of a walk, away from the constant pressure of survival, was tempting. She nodded. "All right," she said, and grabbed her shawl. They walked in silence at first, the only sounds being the rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds. Sarah found herself relaxing, letting the tension in her shoulders ease. The forest trail was shaded and cool, a sharp contrast to the hot, dusty streets of the town. She felt something she had not felt in a long time, freedom, if only for a moment. James spoke softly without pressing her for conversation. "It's easy to feel trapped when life becomes a series of struggles," he said. "I've known that feeling myself, but sometimes even a small change, a different path, can make all the difference." Sarah glanced at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "You understand?" she asked quietly. "I do," he replied. "Life isn't fair. We face hardships we did not ask for. But we also have choices, and those choices can lead to new beginnings if we are brave enough to take them." The words resonated with Sarah. She had spent so long surviving, not truly living, that the idea of a new beginning seemed almost impossible. Yet here was a man who offered her a chance, not as a charity case, but as someone he respected. Over the next few days, Sarah visited the ranch with James to see the work that needed to be done. She met a few of the ranch hands who greeted her politely and observed the vast expanse of land that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. The ranch was imposing, yet inviting. There was a rhythm to the work, a sense of purpose that she had not felt in a long time. James showed her the barns, the fields, and the stables. He spoke of the animals, each with a name and a personality, and explained the daily routines necessary to keep the ranch running smoothly. Sarah listened intently, absorbing every detail. For the first time, she felt that her skills, her strength, and her determination could be put to meaningful use. She was no longer just surviving. She could contribute to something larger than herself. One evening, as they watched the sun dip below the hills from the porch of the main house, James turned to her. "You are stronger than most people I know," he said. "I can see it in the way you carry yourself, the way you face each day despite everything life has thrown at you. That strength is rare, and it's something worth protecting." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. No one had ever spoken to her like that, acknowledging her strength rather than pitying her for her hardships. She wanted to say something, to express the gratitude and hope that swelled inside her, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply nodded, allowing the silence to carry their shared understanding. As the weeks passed, a quiet bond formed between them. Sarah began to see James not just as a stranger offering help, but as someone who genuinely cared about her well-being. And James, for his part, admired Sarah's resilience, her intelligence, and the quiet courage that had allowed her to survive in a world that had often been cruel. Yet despite the growing connection, Sarah remained cautious. She had been hurt before, and trust did not come easily. She feared losing her independence, becoming dependent on someone else for survival. She worried about the judgment of others, about what it would mean to leave her cabin and step into a life so different from the one she had known. One afternoon, after a long day of work on the ranch, they sat together by the creek, the water sparkling in the sunlight. James broke the silence. "I know this is difficult," he said gently. "I'm not asking you to make any decisions right now. Just know that the offer stands. You are welcome here, and you will be treated with respect no matter what." Sarah looked at him, her heart heavy with both fear and hope. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know what I would do without this chance." James smiled, a rare softness in his rugged face. "You are capable of more than you realize, and sometimes the right opportunity comes along at the right time, even if we are not expecting it." That evening, as Sarah returned to her cabin, she felt a strange mix of emotions: fear, excitement, and cautious hope. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a future that was not defined solely by survival. A future where she could find stability, companionship, and perhaps even happiness. Little did she know that this connection, this growing trust between her and the giant rancher, was only the beginning. The days ahead would bring challenges, choices, and moments that would test her strength, but also open the door to a life she had once thought impossible. The days passed quietly on the ranch, yet the air between Sarah and James was filled with a subtle tension she could not ignore. They worked side by side, tending to the animals, repairing fences, and preparing the fields for the next season. Each day, Sarah noticed something new about him: the way he moved with purpose, how he treated every animal with care, and the way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. There was a gentleness to his strength that fascinated her, and despite her careful reservations, she began to feel a sense of ease she had not known in a long time. James, for his part, found himself thinking about Sarah more than he expected. He admired her courage, her determination, and the way she carried herself despite everything life had thrown at her. Her presence brought a warmth to the ranch that had been missing since his own loss, but he knew he had to be patient. Sarah had been hurt, judged, and abandoned before. Trust did not come easily to her, and he could not rush it. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills and painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, James invited Sarah to sit with him on the porch of the main house. The ranch was quiet, the only sounds being the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze and the distant lowing of the cattle. Sarah sat carefully on the edge of the wooden bench, her hands folded in her lap, feeling a nervous flutter in her chest. "Sarah," James began, his voice calm but serious, "there is something I want to talk to you about, something important." Sarah turned to him, curious but cautious. She had learned to expect surprises in life, and most of them had not been pleasant. Her heart beat a little faster. "I've been thinking a lot about you," he continued, "about how strong you are, how brave, and how much you've endured, and I realized something I should have realized a long time ago." Sarah felt a flicker of unease. The way he looked at her was different, more intense, more honest. "What is it?" she asked softly. James took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "You need a home, Sarah, a place where you are safe, respected, and valued, and I need a wife. Someone who can share this life with me, someone who can be my partner, my equal, and I think that person could be you." Sarah's breath caught. She stared at him, unsure whether she had heard him correctly. A thousand emotions swirled inside her: shock, fear, disbelief, and surprisingly, a spark of hope. Could it be possible that a man like James would see her not as a widow, not as an outcast, but as someone worthy of love and partnership? You want me to be your wife," she whispered, barely daring to say the words. James nodded, his expression earnest. "Yes, I am offering more than a home, Sarah. I am offering trust, respect, and partnership. I do not want to pressure you, but I wanted to be honest about my intentions. You have a choice, and I will respect whatever decision you make." Sarah felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to grasp the opportunity for safety and companionship. Another part of her recoiled at the thought of giving up her independence, of leaving the life she had fought so hard to maintain. Pride and fear clashed inside her, making her chest feel tight and her thoughts scattered. I need time," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. This is a lot to take in. I've always survived on my own. I don't know if I can trust anyone enough to step into a life like that." James nodded again, understanding her hesitation. "I expected that," he said gently, "and I will give you all the time you need. You don't have to decide now. Spend time here, see the ranch, see how life could be. I promise you, nothing is expected of you that you are not ready for." Over the next several days, Sarah continued to work on the ranch, but now with a new awareness. Every time she glanced at James, she felt a strange mixture of admiration and nervousness. She noticed how he laughed quietly when something amused him, how his hands worked skillfully with the tools, how he treated the animals as if they were family. Slowly she began to see the life he offered not just as an escape from hardship, but as a chance for purpose, companionship, and stability. Despite this, fear still lingered. Sarah spent evenings alone in the cabin, staring at the small fire in the hearth and thinking about the proposal. She thought about her late husband and the life they had shared. She wondered if agreeing to marry James would be a betrayal of his memory. She worried about her ability to adjust to a new life, to a new family, and to the scrutiny of others. And yet, beneath all the fear, there was a quiet hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, she could find happiness again. One afternoon, James suggested they check the fence along the northern pasture. The day was warm, and the ranch stretched out endlessly before them, fields of green blending with the golden hues of late summer. As they worked together, repairing broken boards and tightening wires, the conversation turned personal. "You've been through so much," James said quietly, handing her a hammer. "I can see it in the way you carry yourself, and yet you continue. That strength, it's remarkable." Sarah paused, considering his words. "I've had to be strong," she admitted. "There wasn't much choice after everything that happened, but it's lonely being strong all the time. You get used to it, but it's exhausting." James nodded, leaning against the fence post. "I understand more than you know. I've carried my own burdens, and I've learned that sharing life with someone doesn't make you weak, it makes you stronger." Sarah looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. She wanted to believe him, but the caution that had been her shield for so long would not disappear overnight. "I want to believe that," she said softly, "but I've been hurt before. Trust doesn't come easily to me." "I know," James said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "And that's why I'm patient. I'm not asking you to decide anything right now. I just want you to see that a life together could be possible, that it could be something good, not because it's convenient, but because it's built on respect, trust, and partnership." Over the following week, Sarah found herself observing the ranch more closely, imagining herself living there not as a guest, but as a part of the daily rhythm of life. She thought about the animals, the fields, and the hands that worked alongside hers. The work was demanding, but it was meaningful. She felt a sense of purpose she had not felt since her husband's passing. One evening, as the sky turned shades of purple and gold, James invited Sarah to sit on a small hill overlooking the ranch. The wind rustled the tall grasses, and the distant mountains stood like silent guardians. He looked at her with a calm intensity. "Sarah," he said, "I understand your hesitation. I know this is not an easy decision, but I want you to know that I am serious. I am not offering you wealth or comfort alone. I am offering partnership, respect, and a chance to build a life together. You have the freedom to choose, and I will honor that choice, whatever it may be." Sarah's heart pounded. She wanted to say yes, to step into the life he offered, but the weight of fear and pride held her back. Instead, she remained silent, letting the wind carry away the words she could not yet speak. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between them deepened. They laughed together, worked together, and faced challenges side by side. A storm damaged part of the fence one evening, and they spent hours in the rain repairing it. Through the labor and the shared struggle, Sarah began to see James not just as a strong, imposing figure, but as a man who valued her, respected her, and treated her as an equal. The moment of choice came quietly, without fanfare. One morning, as Sarah finished feeding the horses, James approached her. He did not speak immediately, simply watching her with steady eyes. Finally, he said, "You've seen the ranch, the work, and the life we could have. I want you to know, without pressure or expectation, that my offer still stands. You can choose to stay here as part of this life, not because you have to, but because you want to." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. She thought about the cabin, the loneliness, and the struggle. She thought about the small joys she had found here, the laughter, the work, the trust, and the connection. Slowly she nodded, a tentative but firm gesture. I want to try," she said softly. "I want to see if we can work." James smiled, relief and happiness shining in his eyes. "That is all I ask," he said. "We will take it one day at a time, together." For the first time in many months, Sarah felt a lightness in her chest. Fear still lingered, but it was tempered by hope. She had taken the first step toward a new life, one that offered safety, partnership, and the possibility of happiness. And as she looked at James, standing beside her with quiet strength and unwavering respect, she realized that this choice, though daunting, was also the beginning of something extraordinary. Sarah woke early that morning, the sunlight streaming gently through the small window of her cabin. Today was different. Today, she would leave the only home she had known since her husband's passing and step into a life she had never dared to imagine. Her heart fluttered with a mix of excitement, fear, and a strange sense of hope she had almost forgotten existed. She packed her belongings slowly, careful to take only what she truly needed. Each item she placed in her bag reminded her of the life she had survived, the struggles she had endured, and the courage that had brought her here. When she stepped outside, James was waiting by the edge of the property. His horse was saddled and ready, but he was standing on the ground, not mounting it. He greeted her with a quiet smile, and for a moment words were unnecessary. They both understood the significance of this day. "You ready?" he asked gently. Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." They traveled the short distance to the ranch in silence, the landscape unfolding before them in a patchwork of fields, barns, and pastures. Sarah felt her chest tighten as she saw the main house in the distance, solid and welcoming. It was far larger than her humble cabin, but it did not feel intimidating. Instead, it radiated warmth and the promise of a fresh start. Upon arrival, James showed her to a small but comfortable room in the house, giving her space to settle in. "This will be your room," he said. "Take your time to get comfortable. Make it yours." Sarah looked around the room, taking in the simple furnishings, the soft bedding, and the clean, welcoming space. It was more than she had hoped for. She ran her fingers over the wooden table by the window, imagining herself sitting there in the mornings, writing letters or tending to small tasks. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of peace. Over the next few days, Sarah immersed herself in the daily life of the ranch. She learned to feed the animals, tend the garden, and repair fences under James's careful guidance. He never rushed her or made her feel inadequate. Instead, he explained each task patiently, offering encouragement and gentle advice. Sarah discovered that the work, though demanding, brought a sense of accomplishment she had not felt in years. Each chore completed was a victory, a reminder that she could thrive in this new life if she allowed herself to try. The mornings were filled with work, but the evenings brought quiet moments of reflection. Sarah would sit by the barn or on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills, and think about how far she had come. She marveled at the fact that she was no longer alone, that she had a place where she was valued, respected, and safe. And though fear still lingered, fear of losing herself, of making a mistake, or of being judged, she felt a growing sense of confidence that she could handle whatever came her way. James noticed the changes in her. He admired the way she moved through the ranch, her hands strong but careful, her mind alert and thoughtful. He appreciated her quiet humor, the way she noticed small details, and her unwavering dedication to the work. More than that, he admired her heart, the kindness she showed to the animals, to the land, and even to the few ranch hands who had initially been skeptical of her presence. One evening, after a long day of tending the fields, James and Sarah sat together on the porch, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight. The air was cool and filled with the scent of hay and earth. Sarah rested her head on her hands, her thoughts wandering. "James," she began hesitantly, "I wasn't sure if I could do this. I was afraid I would fail or that I wouldn't belong here. But I think I'm beginning to see that this life, it suits me in ways I didn't expect." James looked at her, a soft smile on his face. "You belong here, Sarah, not just because of the work you do, but because of who you are. You've shown strength, courage, and kindness. Those are the things that make a home, not walls or roofs." Sarah felt warmth rise in her chest at his words. For so long, she had thought her worth was measured only by survival. But here, she realized, it was measured by her heart, her efforts, and her willingness to embrace life again. Despite the growing trust and comfort, life on the ranch was not without challenges. One afternoon, A sudden summer storm swept across the fields, bringing heavy rain and fierce winds. The animals grew restless, and the fences threatened to collapse under the pressure. Sarah and James sprang into action, working together to secure the barns and calm the frightened livestock. Water soaked their clothes, and the wind whipped against their faces, but neither complained. They relied on each other's strengths, coordinating without words, trusting instincts honed by experience and necessity. After hours of effort, the storm passed, leaving the ranch battered but intact. Sarah stood beside James, shivering but proud, watching the sun reappear through the clouds. "We did it," she said, a mixture of exhaustion and triumph in her voice. James smiled at her, admiration shining in his eyes. "We make a good team," he said simply. "Stronger together than we ever could be alone." That night, Sarah lay in her room, listening to the gentle sounds of the ranch, the lowing of the cattle, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant call of an owl. She thought about the storm, about the work they had accomplished, and about the man who had offered her a chance at a new life. Slowly, a sense of peace settled over her. She realized that challenges, while frightening, could be faced with courage and support. And she began to understand that she was not just surviving anymore. She was living, contributing, and thriving. As the weeks went by, Sarah grew more confident in her abilities on the ranch. She handled the animals with care and skill, tended the fields, and even managed the garden that provided fresh vegetables for the household. She and James worked together seamlessly, their bond strengthening with each shared task and quiet conversation. They laughed together, celebrated small victories, and faced setbacks as a team. Sarah also began to form connections with the ranch hands and neighbors. Her initial shyness and caution gradually gave way to friendly smiles and respectful greetings. People began to see her not as the widow who had struggled, but as a capable, kind, and resilient woman who contributed meaningfully to the community. It was a transformation that filled her with quiet pride and reinforced her sense of belonging. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of gold and crimson, James invited Sarah to sit with him on a hill overlooking the ranch. The view was breathtaking, fields stretching endlessly, animals grazing peacefully, and the mountains standing tall in the distance. "You've changed," James said softly, his eyes on her. "Since you arrived here, I've seen you grow stronger, more confident, and more at peace. You've brought life and warmth to this place in ways I couldn't have imagined." Sarah looked down, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. I've learned a lot, about work, about trust, and about myself. I never thought I could feel like this again, like I belong somewhere." James turned to her, his expression gentle but intense. "You do belong, Sarah, here with me on this ranch. Not because I need you to, but because you are part of what makes this life whole." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She had spent so long alone, so long surviving, that the idea of being valued, needed, and respected was almost overwhelming. She reached out and took his hand, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. In the days that followed, Sarah and James faced more challenges. The animals needed extra care during a heat wave, the fences required constant repair, and a neighboring ranch had disputes that demanded negotiation. Through it all, they worked together, trusting each other's judgment, supporting each other's strengths, and learning to navigate difficulties as a team. With each passing day, Sarah's confidence grew. She no longer doubted her place on the ranch or her ability to contribute meaningfully. She had found not only a home, but also a sense of purpose, a life where her efforts mattered and her heart could heal. And in James, she found a partner who respected her, valued her, and offered companionship without diminishing her independence. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to twinkle in the clear sky, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the small, weathered cabin on the outskirts of town to the sprawling, vibrant ranch, she had faced fear, doubt, and loneliness. But she had also discovered strength, resilience, and the power of trust and connection. She knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but for the first time, she felt ready to face them, not alone, but with someone who truly understood and valued her. And as she looked at James, standing nearby with a quiet smile, she realized that this life, with all its demands and rewards, was exactly where she was meant to be. The seasons began to change on the ranch, bringing with them the gentle rhythm of life that Sarah had grown to love. Spring blossomed into summer, the fields turning green, the garden flourishing, and the animals thriving under her care. With each passing day, Sarah's confidence grew, as did her bond with James. Together they worked tirelessly, but there was also laughter, quiet conversations, and shared moments that filled the spaces between labor. Life was demanding, yet rewarding, and Sarah could feel the weight of fear and loneliness lifting from her heart. James noticed the subtle changes in Sarah. She smiled more freely, moved with purpose and pride, and even found joy in small successes, like coaxing a stubborn horse to cooperate or seeing the first blooms in the garden. Her resilience and determination inspired him daily, and he admired not just her strength, but also her kindness, the way she cared for every living thing on the ranch, from the animals to the land itself. One evening, as they watched the sun set over the rolling hills, James turned to Sarah with a serious expression. "You've grown so much since you arrived here," he said softly. "I am proud of you, of all you've done and all you are, and I want you to know something important." Sarah looked at him, her heart beating faster. She had anticipated this moment for months, though the thought of it still made her nervous. "I want us to make this official," James continued, "not just as partners on the ranch, but as husband and wife. You've chosen this life, and I want to choose it with you fully and openly." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. The offer was more than she had ever dared to hope for, not just safety and companionship, but love, respect, and a future together. She took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Their wedding was simple but filled with joy. Neighbors and friends from the town, once skeptical of the widow who had struggled, came to witness the union. The ceremony took place on the ranch, under a canopy of trees, with the animals grazing peacefully nearby. There was laughter, smiles, and the soft music of a small fiddle played by one of the ranch hands. Sarah wore a modest dress and James stood tall beside her, proud and tender. They exchanged vows, not grandiose but heartfelt, promises of trust, respect, and unwavering partnership. Life on the ranch after the wedding settled into a comfortable, fulfilling rhythm. Sarah continued to manage the garden, tend to the animals, and assist with daily chores, but now with a sense of shared purpose. James and Sarah worked as a team, each supporting the other, making decisions together, and celebrating successes as partners. The ranch flourished under their combined care, a symbol of their growing life together. The challenges did not vanish. Harsh weather, difficult repairs, and the occasional dispute with neighboring ranches tested their patience and determination. But now, with love and trust as their foundation, these obstacles were easier to face. They learned to communicate openly, support one another's strengths, and find solutions together. Through these trials, their bond deepened, evolving from trust into a profound companionship and love that anchored both of them. Sarah also found herself welcomed into the community in a new way. Neighbors who had once whispered now sought her advice, admired her dedication, and appreciated her contributions. Children played in the fields without fear, knowing she would watch over them as she did the animals. She became a respected figure in the town, no longer defined by past hardships but by her resilience, kindness, and strength. As months turned into years, Sarah and James built a family together. Children came into their lives, bringing laughter, energy, and a renewed sense of purpose. Sarah's heart, once heavy with grief and isolation, now overflowed with love and fulfillment. She had found not only a husband, but a true partner who valued her, respected her, and cherished her for who she was. The ranch itself became a testament to their shared efforts. Fields bloomed with crops, barns stood sturdy, and animals thrived. Each corner of the property bore witness to their hard work, trust, and commitment to one another. Friends and neighbors often remarked on the harmony of the place, a reflection of the love and partnership that had transformed it. One quiet evening, as Sarah and James sat on the porch watching the sunset, she leaned her head against his shoulder. "I never imagined life could be like this," she murmured. "After all I've been through, I didn't think happiness was possible again." James kissed the top of her head gently. "Life has a way of surprising us," he said softly. "We face hardships, yes, but we also find moments of joy, love, and peace. You've shown me that courage and heart can create something beautiful, even after pain." Sarah smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. She thought about the lonely days in her cabin, the uncertainty, and the struggle to survive. And she realized that every step, every hardship had led her here, to a life filled with love, purpose, and belonging. Their story became a quiet legend in the town, a tale of resilience, second chances, and the power of trust and partnership. People spoke of the widow who had once struggled alone, and the giant rancher who had offered her more than safety, a life together built on respect, love, and shared dreams. It was a story that reminded everyone that life could offer new beginnings, even when hope seemed distant. Years later, Sarah often walked through the garden she had nurtured, tending to the animals she loved, and reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about James, standing beside her through every challenge and triumph, and she knew that their bond was unbreakable. Together, they had faced the storms of life and built a home, a family, and a future filled with joy and fulfillment. And as the sun set over the ranch, casting a golden glow across the fields, Sarah felt a quiet certainty. She had found her home, her partner, and her place in the world. And in that moment, she knew that life, with all its struggles and blessings, had given her exactly what she needed, and more.